Starting out, when it comes to narcissism, there's a lot of various different things to unpack. First and foremost, a narcissist is truly diagnosed by a licensed therapist, in at least how it works within the States. So when it comes to the typical discussions online about narcissists and saying this person's a narcissist and it's not a person that has been diagnosed as a narcissist, they can actually be diagnosed as multiple different things. So within this discussion, we're speaking of people who have narcissistic tendencies. Now, when it comes to narcissistic tendencies, anyone and everyone has probably displayed various different types of narcissistic tendencies at various points in time, mostly when dealing with a traumatic situation. So a lot of those who we'd call narcissists who are displaying narcissistic traits and unable to get out of that mindset or mentality or locked into that, oftentimes it's due to a lot of trauma in their life. And I'll explain this. When we are dealing with traumatic or emotionally painful or even just physically painful situations, your brain cannot think of anything outside of you. Empathy, the ability to empathize, is the first thing that gets shut down because you have to focus on yourself and to function. A lot of times this is with narcissists. So I was raised primarily by my mom, who has clear-cut narcissistic tendencies. My brother patterned himself after her. He became the golden child. I was the one that nobody gives a hoot about, pretty much, and was labeled as the bad or terrible one, even though most of my life has strived to be a good person and to counteract the negativity that was constantly labeled upon me within my childhood of growing up. Now, because I was in that environment, I found another person with narcissistic tendencies to marry. And so being that I've been around these types for a serious bulk of my life, I've had a lot of time to experiment, to heal, obviously, and to really gain a lot of insight into how their brain patterning works and why. Granted, I'm going to make this disclaimer that I am not a licensed therapist, and I do not seek to be one, although there's lots of pros and cons. I don't like the cons associated with being a licensed therapist, but I am a coach, and I use all these learnings with helping clients who are considered empaths or highly sensitive people because of these situations, helping them to regain their sense of self and heal. So coming back to narcissists, a lot of it is they're dealing with trauma that they've never fully dealt with and are not going to deal with. And because of that, they end up causing more pain around themselves. These people often are in just terrible emotional pain. There is a phenomenon where it's called narcissistic collapse or narcissistic breakdown, where they kind of can't hold it together and they just fall apart and freak out. A lot of times what they do is they cast people as characters in the play of their mind, and they do whatever they can to keep their reality, the reality that they can control, safe and sound. The instant that you blur the lines on the reality or rock the boat on their reality or what they think is reality is when they start to freak out and start going on a tirade. But they need to control things because when things are not in their control, they cannot handle and cannot actually process it. So one of the times I visited my mom, I was able to kind of experiment with her psyche a bit. And I know that sounds terrible, but I have been around this person, obviously, and I just needed to know what's going on with the brain patterning. She asked me to basically screw in these lights, and I was having back issues. I've had a major accident in 2017, auto accident in 2017. So sometimes my back is not in a position or shape to be doing hard labor like that or semi-hard labor. So I asked her to grab the drill. Well, actually, first I asked her if she had a drill, and she was like, yes, but I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not going to let you use it. And so I calmly turned around and was like, okay, why? What's going on there? Is there any way that I could support? Is there any way that I could help bring that drill out? Because right now my back is really hurting and I can't do this task. So she's like, well, whatever, if you can't do it, just whatever, you can't do it. And just, I don't know. And she just starts freaking out. And I remain calm and I'm like, well, I mean, I could get this done a lot faster if there's the drill. So what's happening with the drill? Is it buried somewhere? And her brain just couldn't process anything outside of the plan that she had. It wasn't until about 30 to 40 minutes later that she was able to articulate that, oh yeah, the drill is buried. She could not even begin to say that in the moment because she had already pre-patterned her brain to control the situation in a very specific way and could not break out of that patterning. So when it comes to empaths and empathy, there's a lot to learn around that too. One of my theories is that those with narcissistic tendencies who are extremely entrenched in them have basically, or were supposed to be, highly empathic. However, because of the pressure, because of trauma, they've imploded. They're essentially the black holes to the empath that is like a sun radiating energy, light, love, whatever. Like narcissists are set to drain, empaths are set to charge. So some of the issues with empaths are lack of boundaries, which is why you would think most empaths would not be in a leadership position, but it's mainly due to lack of boundaries. They also tend to enmesh themselves with another person. Still harkens back to lack of boundaries, especially on who they are and not really knowing who they are in the first place. And there's one other thing, and I forgot. And adverse coping mechanisms to align or counterbalance themselves in a way. So instead of pity, as was mentioned before, pity is not a good thing. Compassion is a better way. Empathizing, or I understand what you're going through, is even better. So, but that really does take compassion. So coming back to narcissistic tendencies and our society, there's a lot to unpack around that too, because people are constantly inundated with low-grade trauma. Sorry, the church is a big one on this. Media and propaganda are other areas that people are constantly inundated with this. Media as in news media. And that does bring people into running on a fear paradigm, which encourages narcissistic tendencies. There are other areas like coaching, which was mentioned before, that encourages this dynamic in some ways, which is why I had to develop specifically my own style of coaching. So there's also more ways that our society functions that actually aids psychopathy and people with narcissistic tendencies to thrive, unfortunately. In more of a tribal or a close-knit village paradigm, those types obviously would not thrive at all. So a lot of this is learned behaviors. Like, as I mentioned previously, my brother patterned himself after my mom. And unfortunately, my daughter has picked up some adverse mechanisms from her father. But there is another layer to this on the subject of adverse coping mechanisms. So the ex, my daughter's father, has ADHD. There's a great book called Is It You, Me, or ADD? And this kind of goes into a lot of those narcissistic tendencies being part of adverse coping to having ADD or ADHD. But also there will certainly be genetic factors, especially if you're into epigenetics, just due to the amount of stress and mental gymnastics that a person with narcissistic tendencies has to go through. And the stuff that they keep bottled up is, not fun. Let's just say I came across a notebook from the ex. I call him the ex. He's not mine. He's out of my life. But I came across a notebook that was just like where he put all of his negative thoughts, and I had to burn it. It was bad. Oh, and one more thing. The reason why there is such a grandiosity to those with narcissistic tendencies and how they hype themselves up and make themselves be like the center of the universe is because they actually feel really small and really extremely insecure. It is like a pufferfish paradigm. They puff themselves up to seem bigger than what they really are because they are extremely threatened by anything that is outside of them and outside of their control. So a lot of people misconstrue that as the Greek mythology of Narcissus to be like this self-love, and it is actually the extreme opposite of that. And they are acting as if they have, this self-love or self-obsession, and it's all about self at the end of the day.